The Wind is My Mother by Bearhart and Molly Larkin. Chapter 3. You don't ask to be a medicine man. When I was a child, our people rarely went to physicians when they were sick because the medicine men and women of our tribe had great knowledge of herbs and chants that would cure most any illness. I didn't really know too much about what they did because when someone was being doctored by our medicine people, the children were sent somewhere else. The belief was that the illness taken out of a sick person could sometimes bounce over to those in their bloodline. So, for safety reasons, they used to keep us children occupied or tell us not to come around, not to bother the person being doctored, which of course made me even more curious about what was going on. My mother had some kind of illness when I was around 11 years old, and she sent me to a relative who was a medicine man with instructions as to exactly what to say to him. She had fixed a bundle to give him in exchange for his doctoring, and I brought it with me to his house. I told him about my mother's illness, and instead of coming home with me, he said, "I'll go ahead and fix the medicine, and you can bring it back to her." I sat out on the front porch while he went inside, and I could hear him singing and using his blowpipe to blow into the medicine. When he was done, he placed everything in a jar with a lid on it and handed it to me, telling me at what times she was to use the medicine. After I gave him the bundle from my mother, he shook my hand and I left. I never did know the exact nature of her illness, only that she was feeling weak all over and couldn't do her work around the house and had to lie down a lot. I think she had diarrhea along with it, but she got better after that man fixed her medicine. That was my first real introduction to dealing with a medicine man in person, but I still was not allowed to ask questions about it, and I didn't know that later on I would be learning some of those healing ways. The creek had about as many medicine women as men, and their knowledge and abilities went far beyond the healing arts. In the old days, when our medicine people were not doctoring their patients or away on some quest, they would occasionally get together and take some time for themselves, meeting, drinking, and kind of letting off steam. I don't know where they got the liquor, because in those days it was illegal for Indians to drink, but they managed it somehow. They didn't do this all the time, just every now and then, as it was one of those ways of staying connected with the earth and humanity. My mother told me about how they would show off in front of one another while they were drinking. As a child, she saw one instance where one of them took a whiskey bottle, said a chant, blew on the bottle, physically twisted the glass in his hands, and set it down. It was still glass, but it was as though it had been something else in his hands, something that allowed itself to be reshaped. Another one took his belt off, blew on it, flung it on the floor, and it turned into a live snake. Those are just some of the things they did, kind of like boys showing off to one another. "I can do this. That's nothing. Watch this." But they would also have occasion to perform such feats in the normal course of their responsibilities, such as preparing a delegate for the tribe to go to Washington. You may remember in the Old Western how the President of the United States was known to the Indian people as the Great White Father. We could never understand why very few Indians were ever allowed to see the Great White Father in person. The representatives of the Great White Father could talk to the chief of the tribe, but our chief could never confront the head man of the white nation. There always had to be a go-between. Anyway, if a tribal delegate was going to Washington to speak on certain issues, the tribe would choose one of our medicine men to fix up the delegate for that trip in medicine ways. In order to choose which medicine man would attend to the delegate, or perhaps even accompany him to Washington, they would all sit around the circle put a feather between them, and try out their powers. The medicine man who could fly that feather the highest got the job. When I was a small boy, I saw one instance where a medicine man made that feather move, then another made it stand on end. When it came to my mother's uncle, the feather just zipped straight up, several feet in the air. So he was the one designated. Once the medicine man was chosen, he would fix an herb for the delegate to put in his mouth, so that when he spoke, he would be eloquent and clear in his presentation. At the same time, that medicine would be fixed in such a way that his words would be heard by his audience as being worthy of consideration. Sometimes a medicine person would also fix face paint so that the delegate would be noticed out of a crowd of people and be looked upon with respect and favor. Those are just a few of the things that our medicine people used to do. Medicine ways were the furthest thing from my mind when I was growing up. Although I had always been interested in those able to help others who were in need, in addition to curing illnesses, there was a great deal of sorcery practiced in our tribe, and I was always intrigued by the stories I heard and the things that I saw. My father was an official interpreter for our tribe, and he often interpreted for people wanting to buy mineral rights or land owned by our people. One of the people he interpreted for was a man named Anheuser from St. Louis. He was of the Anheuser-Busch beer family, and he brought a lot of land from our Indians. One Christmas, my dad came home with a big package, and inside was a really nice overcoat that Mr. Anheuser had sent as a gift. I always remembered that. My father got paid to interpret, but sometimes people would do something more to show their appreciation. My father would also interpret when there was a court trial involving Creeks who didn't speak English. One of my mother's relatives had killed his wife. I was too small to understand what the argument had been about, but he was on the trial in the white man's court, and every night I would listen when my father came home and told my mother what had happened. One night, my mother said, "I guess they'll send him to prison." My father answered, "I don't know about that. He knows a lot of medicine ways, and I know he's going to use medicine during the trial." That's all he said. When the verdict came in, my relative got off. When my dad first became sick, my older brother, who was not raised in the traditional ways, took him to a medicine doctor who had diagnosed him as having pernicious anemia. He had tightness in his chest, arms, and legs, and was weak all over. Not too much was known about pernicious anemia at that time, but the doctor got pretty close to understanding it because he kept giving my dad liver extract. About the same time, a relative of my mother gave her some money, saying, "You might want to send for one of our medicine men to look after him." So that's what she did. The medicine man came over, and after diagnosing the situation, shook his head and said, "This kind of illness is something new to our people. We've never experienced it before. So if you want to find someone else, I'll understand. I can fix some medicine to make him feel better, but that's about all I can do." My mother went ahead and let him fix the medicine anyway, and there again, I had to retreat. Go look after the stock around the barn. Well, he made the medicine. After my father took that medicine, it seemed to loosen the tightness where he could sit up in bed, but he was still weak. So it did help some, but like the medicine man said, it was not the cure. It just made my dad feel better for a while. It was around the same time that I was first told about witchcraft, how when a person is sick, sorcerers will come around. He would sometimes see a dull glow of light off the distance, and in our way, it meant sorcerers who practiced the dark ways were coming. They could make themselves invisible, and that light enabled them to see at night. My dad was still lying out under our arbor, and, knowing my father was ill, even though they hadn't caused his illness, the sorcerers wanted to get us to leave his bedside so they can get close enough to finish him off and suck out his heart. The heart of a dead person was their strength. My mother's relatives told me, when you see that light, go check on it, but don't go too far away from your father's bedside. That's what they want. My dad had a .45 caliber pistol, so when I saw that light, I would start shooting in that direction, aiming up high, so I wouldn't hit any animals. My relatives knew I did that, so when they came to a visit at night, they'd start singing real loud, so I wouldn't shoot them. They were afraid of me. We were warned that sorcerers could put an entire household to sleep from a distance. So we had medicine people make protection medicine and sprinkle it all around the arbor. When I saw anything unusual, I would check on it. But I'd come right back to the arbor because as long as I stayed within it, I was safe. And I'd sit up with my dad all night. I had a cousin who on occasion stayed with us to help out around the house. And one night he came over and said he learned a chant. If he sang it just before we went to sleep, he would wake up when the sorcerers came around. So he sang the chant, and feeling confident, we went to sleep on the porch instead of sitting up as we were supposed to. In the middle of the night, we woke up, but we couldn't move our arms or legs. I guess something was missing from his chant. We were both awake and looking at each other, but that's about all we could do. So I started talking. Those people who are coming will think we're all asleep. That's right. We really fooled them. We kept talking like that, and just by talking to each other, we kept them away. We couldn't do anything else, but the sorcerers didn't know that. My elders told me that before the white man came, sorcery was not used on people. It was used to hunt animals when game was scarce. Once our people found an animal, they put it in a trance-like state. Then they gave an offering and took its life so they would have food to eat. When our people were removed from Georgia and Alabama to Indian Territory, they didn't have the opportunity to hunt anymore, so they started using sorcery on humans. Some of our people had money that was given to them for the hardships they endured and having been moved to new land. They didn't have banks, and if these were white men's banks around here, they didn't trust them. So the sorcerer knew that they had money hidden somewhere around the house. He could put a whole household of people to sleep from a distance and open almost any door by just blowing on the lock. Then he'd go in and ask, "Where is your money?" And they would tell him. Using a chant to shoot foreign objects into bodies used to be a very common occurrence, and it isn't only humans who can do it. The blue jay is a great protector and is very determined in protecting its own nest. One of my elders, Sam Butlett, once observed a blue jay deal with a snake crawling up a tree toward his nest. The blue jay came around, squawking and screaming and hollering and trying to divert the snake, but that snake kept going up the tree, getting close to the nest, so the blue jay flew way up high, then turned and dove straight at the snake and whizzed by. A moment later, that snake toppled off and fell to the ground. Sam said, "I began to wonder what happened, what that bird did to get that snake off the tree." So he went over to where the snake was still writhing around. Right in its head was one of the blue jay's feathers, shot straight through like an arrow. That called shooting, and that's what that blue jay did to protect its young in the nest. Sam went on to tell me that when there are blue jays around your house, they have come to protect and take care of you. The reason they're blue is that they were sent here by the Great Spirit. The sky is blue, and it represents the Great Spirit above. The protection of the blue jay is one of the ways the Great Spirit acknowledges our presence here. The initiation. In our tribe, you didn't go out and say, "I want to be a medicine man." In fact, when you're young, you're not even thinking about things like that. I certainly wasn't. But one day when I was 18 years old, an old man came to see me. We try not to let an old person come to us. We go see them. Maybe they need food, maybe they're sick, or need to be attended to in some way. When an old person does come to you, there's usually a pretty good reason for them coming. They'll say, I have something in mind, and they're going to tell you immediately. If they came with a certain purpose, they're not going to sit around and talk about politics and weather and about this and that all day long. We talk a lot, but we're not quite socializers, just to pass the time or to be pleasant. So here's this old man, Daniel Beaver, who came to our home, and the first thing we did was offer him something to eat. He sat there and ate, and then he said to my mother, I came to see your son here. All right, go ahead and talk to him. First he said, Son, do you know me? Yes. Do you also know what I do? I know you help people. That's right, I've noticed you. I know your folks. I know where they come from, their clans, upright people in every way. As I'm getting on in years, I find that perhaps I may not have too many days left that I don't know, but of all the people I have known over the years through the medicine ways, I've been watching you. How you carry yourself, how you keep your word. I hear about you from other people. One day there was an old man who came to see your family. You saw him way down at the end of the road carrying his satchel, and you ran all the way in that hot August afternoon. Grandpa, come in and eat with us. Let me carry your bag. You carried it for him. You sat him down and gave him some food and water. I've heard a lot of things about you, not only among our people, but among the white people also. They all know you. In fact, the whole town of Okima knows you. They always address you as Chief. We know how you treat and care for other people. You may think nothing of those things, but it means a lot to us. What I have in mind is this. I have to turn my ways over to someone who's qualified. I looked around in our own area, and I haven't found anyone except you. Everywhere I look, you keep coming back into my line of vision, so I know that you are the one to carry on. I would be honored if you would allow me to turn some of my medicine ways over to you. In our tribe, we are taught early in life to be good recipients. When someone gives you something, whether a big thing or a small thing, our people say the Great Spirit doesn't look at size, only how that gift is given. Non-Indians know how to give, but they don't always know how to receive things properly. They might say, you shouldn't have, or why? They put a lot of little blocks up because they're so used to giving, but not used to receiving. When someone gives to you, he wants to satisfy himself in some way by doing it. And if you say no, you hurt his feelings. That's what I learned from my parents. I said, Grandfather, you're going to give me something wonderful because through your ways, you make people feel a little better, physically, mentally, and spiritually. So I would be the one honored to learn your ways. I will do my very best to take care of your gift in a good way. That's how I started with Daniel Beaver. Several weeks later, another medicine man, Dave Lewis, came with the same thing in mind. So I have medicine ways coming to me from 2 lineages. Starting out. The first day I was to meet with Dave Lewis, I got there on time, but he didn't speak to me. He was going here and there, checking on his plants, tidying up his house, and making out like I wasn't even around. He had asked me to come, so I wondered why he was ignoring me. I kept looking at my watch, and at one point I thought maybe I should leave. Perhaps he has changed his mind. After I thought about leaving, I said to myself, no, I'm going to wait this out. See how long it takes for him to notice me. He seemed to read my mind because he immediately turned to me and said, now you have arrived. As soon as I made up my mind to stay, he felt I had arrived the way he wanted me to. Any feelings of pride or that I was really somebody important had to go down the drain first. I had to empty all of that out of me and to be able to learn something. When I reached that point, he said, "Now you have arrived."